Les verbes irréguliers, être, avoir, aller, faire. In French, there are 4 types of verbs. Regular verbs, such as les verbes in er, like parler, étudier, and danser. Verbs that end in er, like finir, to finish, grossir, to gain weight, choisir, to choose, or les verbes in like vendre, to sell, rendre, to return something, or attendre, to wait for. The 4th category of verbs in French are les verbes irréguliers, irregular verbs, verbs that don't have a stem with each of their subjects or common endings. Some examples of irregular verbs are être, avoir, aller, faire, and vouloir. There's several other ones that we learned, but today we're just going to focus on être, avoir, aller, and faire. Now, before we go through and review the verb forms of these 4 verbs, I want to go back and review how we usually set up our verb charts. When we set up a verb chart, we usually put our subject pronouns on one side, where we start with the very left side with the singular subject pronouns, je, tu, il, elle, and on, subjects that are talking about only one person, and then on the right side we put our plural subject pronouns, nous, vous, il, and elle pluriel. Setting up all our verb boxes like this will help us to remember verb forms, and it's especially helpful for those people who are visual learners. So the first verb that we're going to look at is the verb être. Être in anglais is to be. So anytime we want to say that somebody is or are, we're going to use a form of this verb. To be in English is also an irregular verb. So we'll start with the subject pronoun je, and to say I am, we'll say je suis. To say you are, when you're speaking to one person informally, you'll say tu es. To say he or she or one is, we'll use the form est also. However, this time it's spelled est, but remember that T is silent. So il, elle, on est, he is, she is, or one is. To say we are, nous sommes, you all are, vous êtes. To say they are, you'll use ils sont or elles sont. And remember, you'll use il pluriel, where the S is silent, to say either a group that is a mixed group or a group of guys, or elle pluriel if it's only a group of females. Now, to show you a few examples that use the verb être, remember we use être in sentences where we want to describe people. For example, if we wanted to say French students are intelligent, we would say les élèves de français sont intelligents. And because les élèves de français is a plural subject, third person plural, we'd use the form sont to go with that subject. We also often use the verb être to say where people are. So if we wanted to say we are in class now, we would say nous sommes en classe maintenant. One thing that you don't want to do, however, with the form of être is you never want to use a conjugated form of the verb être in front of another verb. Unlike English, we don't have the present progressive in French. So if we want to say, I am studying this evening, we will not use suis in front of the verb étudier. Instead, we would just say, j'étudie ce soir. So careful with that present progressive. The next verb I want to look at is the verb avoir. And avoir, remember, means to have. I always thought it was helpful to think avoir starts with AV and have has the letters AV in it, so you can use that to help you remember avoir means to have. To say I have, you use the form a. Now remember, since je ends with the letter E, a vowel, and a starts with a vowel, you can't actually use je and a. What you actually have to do is use J apostrophe. To say I have in French is j'ai. To say you have, tu as. He, she, one has. Il, elle, on a. Nous avons, to say we have. And vous avez, to say you all have. Now with these, and also the il and elle plural form, ils ont, or elles ont, because avons, avez, and ont start with a vowel, you actually pronounce that S like a Z at the end of nous and vous and il pluriel or elle pluriel. So nous avons, careful, make sure you pronounce that S like a Z to link those together. That's the term liaison. To go through a couple example sentences that use avoir. Les élèves de français ont toujours leurs livres. French students always have their books. Again, using the plural form, third person plural form of avoir, since les élèves is the third person plural subject. You'll also often use avoir to give someone's age. Remember, in French, we say someone is a certain number of years, but in English, we say someone is a certain number of years. However, in French, you say someone has a certain number of years. So if we wanted to say my brother is 5 years old, in French, you say mon frère a 5 ans, which literally translates to my brother has 5 years. So careful, remember to use avoir when you're giving age. Next, let's look at the verb aller. Aller en anglais is to go. And I always told people, remember the two L's in aller, if you add little feet to them, they're like legs, so you can use that to help you remember aller, to go, because you have to have legs to go. Let's go through these forms. So to say I go or I'm going, you would say je vais. To say you go, tu vas, where that S is silent on the end. Il, elle, on va. To say he goes, she goes, or one goes. Nous allons, to say we go. Vous allez, to say you all go. And ils or elles vont, to say they go. And again, like with the verb forms for avoir, because allons and aller, the nous form and the vous form, start with a vowel. Remember to pronounce that S at the end of nous or vous like a Z to link those together. But you won't say the S on il plural or elle plural, because vont starts with a consonant. Now we use aller in sentences where we want to say where people are going. Nous allons à la bibliothèque. We're going to the library. But we also use the verb aller when we want to talk about things we are going to do. Les élèves de français vont étudier chaque soir. French students are going to study each evening. In those instances where we want to talk about something going to happen, you use a conjugated form of the verb aller, and then you use an infinitive of whatever action isn't happening now, but is going to happen. We call that le futur proche, or the close future. Lastly, let's look at the verb faire. And faire is used to say you're doing something or to make something. And remember, we have several faire expressions that we learned and we'll review, where we use du or de la in between faire and something else to say that an activity is being done. So the forms of the verb faire, to say I'm doing or I'm making, je fais. To say you are doing or you are making, tu fais. So the je form and the tu form are exactly the same. Il, elle, on fait. Sounds like the je form and the tu form, but is spelled a little bit differently, where we have the t at the end instead of an s. Nous faisons, to say we are doing or we are making. Vous faites, where we have an es at the end instead of an ez, to say you all are making or you all are doing. And lastly, ils or elles font, to say they are doing or they are making. So a couple examples. Remember, we had the expression faire du théâtre, to say to do theater. So nous faisons du théâtre cet après-midi. We're doing theater this afternoon. Or je fais le dîner ce soir. Here's an example of making something. I'm making dinner this evening. So remember, we'll use faire in expressions to talk about things that we're doing or to say things that we're making. Lastly, faites attention. There's just two points I want to point out to you. The first one being les phrases négatives. Remember, if we want to make a sentence negative, we'll add ne and pas to our sentence, or ne and jamais, or there's a list of other expressions, ne plus, ne personne, that you may or may not have learned last year, which we'll review this year. Ne pas is simply when you just want to say something is not, and ne jamais is never. So we'll add those to our sentences to make them negative. These little tiny words always go around the verb in our sentence. So I always suggest think of them like parentheses, where ne goes before the verb and pas goes after the verb. And one other little thing to point out, remember you can never use the definite articles en, une, or des after pas, so those have to change to de or des apostrophe. Yeah, lots of little things that we have to remember. So if we wanted to make this sentence j'ai un livre, negative, I have a book, to say I don't have a book, it would look like this. Je n'ai pas de livre. Or if we wanted to say I never have a book, je n'ai jamais de livre, where we add our two parts of our negative around the verb. The other thing that I want to remind you about is what the present tense actually is like en français, unlike en anglais. Remember, there's only one simple present tense in French, where in English we have several present tenses. So the sentence je vais avec mes amis could be translated to I go with my friends, which is the simplest translation, but it can also be the English equivalent of I am going with my friends, or I do go with my friends. So careful when you're trying to think of what you want to say in English and then you get it down on paper in French, because remember there's only that one simple French present tense. Okay, les élèves, that about does it with these 4 irregular verbs, aller, avoir, être, and faire. Remember, to memorize these verbs, you really have to practice them. So make yourself some flashcards. Make sure you have very good notes on these, because we will use them often all year long. Au revoir.